Are the global elite weaponizing the Federal Reserve? Is this their plan to build this utopian society where you will own nothing, but you'll be happy? I'm going to reveal some shocking intel that'll help you answer those questions in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's start putting the pieces of the puzzle together by going over a recent Real Vision podcast episode with my good buddy, Luke Groman, where he articulates the idea that maybe, just maybe, Janet Yellen and the Treasury are starting to weaponize the Federal Reserve against Russia because all of their sanctions have not only backfired, but failed miserably. Editor, let's cut to the clip.
I think there is a non-zero chance. I thought it was a really tiny percentage chance 3, 4, 5 months ago. Over the last couple of months, given the headlines we're seeing around the tensions, around the potential energy crisis, et cetera, I still think it's a minority chance, but I think there's a real chance that the Fed has been weaponized by Treasury. And despite this sharp slowdown in the U.S. economy, they go ahead with tightening. And if they do that, you're going to want to own dollars. And that's about it.
So we've got Janet Yellen right here, just holding a sign saying, go dollar sanctions, woohoo! But unfortunately, it didn't go as planned. You can tell because Janet is crying here while holding her sign. So we know that these sanctions completely backfired, like we said, and the price of energy has skyrocketed. Therefore, the revenue going into Russia has skyrocketed as well. This gives them all the cash they need to continue their efforts in Ukraine. But for a moment, let's go over this chart. We start in 2010 all the way to 2050. And on the left, we go from 0 up to 700. That's 700 quadrillion BTUs, which I believe is British thermal units. This is the amount of global energy that is being used, or I should say the amount of energy that is being used by 2 groups of countries. Number 1, and this is the chart we start with, are the OECD countries. Basically, the first world countries you would think of. Over here, we have the same timeline from 2010 to 2050, but these are the non-OECD countries. A lot of the emerging markets would come to mind. So this is the amount of total energy use minus renewables. So editor, go ahead and throw up the original chart. We can see this is petroleum, natural gas, coal, and nuclear. So the point I want to make with these charts is the projected energy use from these countries minus renewables for the OECD countries is going down from 2010 to 2050, where the projected use for the non-OECD countries is not only higher than it is in 2010 or higher than it is today in 2020, 22, but you can see the trend line is continuing to go up. More on this in just a moment. Remember what the global elite's 3 objectives are. Number 1 is to make sure the world uses less energy in the future. But like I said, we'll discuss that more in step number 2 and step number 3. So going back to Janet Yellen's conundrum with Putin, we'll say, she knows that all these sanctions have completely backfired because the prices of the fossil fuels like oil, nat gas gone up, revenues for Russia go up as well. So she looks at this equation and says, all right, we've tackled this problem the wrong way. What we need to do is reduce demand dramatically. And if we reduce demand, then this will bring down the price, and then the revenue going to Putin and Russia will decline as well. Therefore, they'll have less cash, and maybe they'll have to withdraw from Ukraine. Or they'll have to do basically whatever the United States wants them to do, which at the end of the day, I think is Janet Yellen's objective. But the problem becomes, how do you reduce demand sufficiently? Okay, well, it starts by targeting the countries that are using the most fossil fuels, these emerging markets, these non-OECD countries. Well, what do a lot of these have in common? They have a lot of dollar-denominated debt. And Janet Yellen knows that the world revolves around the US dollar. For better or for worse, that's the way it is. 70% of global transactions are settled in dollars. And she also knows that there's something called an interest rate differential. So if the central bank of the United States is raising rates and all other central banks are lowering rates, or if the Fed is raising rates at a faster pace, it's most likely the dollar goes up against those foreign currencies. So she knows that if she can get Jerome Powell to increase interest rates, this creates a stronger dollar. And this crushes the economies of the emerging markets. We'll call it XYZ non-OECD country. So the way this works is the government and the Treasury comes in, and they've got it out for Putin and Russia. Whether that's warranted or not, I'll let you be the judge. And they say what we need to do is reduce demand. So if we increase interest rates, increase the value of the dollar, we're going to crush demand and crush revenue going to Putin and all of his bad guy oligarchs. And we've got the CPI in the United States at 40-year high. So this gives us perfect cover to continue to raise rates farther than we otherwise would to destroy the demand in all of these emerging markets. So government treasury weaponizes the Fed to raise interest rates, to increase the value of the dollar, to crush the economies and the demand for fossil fuels in the emerging markets. Effectively, like my good buddy Luke Groman says, the Treasury and Janet Yellen weaponize the Fed. But it doesn't end there. I think not only could the Treasury and the administration be weaponizing the Fed, but potentially the global elite, the World Economic Forum, and the IMF could be doing the exact same thing. More on that throughout the rest of this video. Step number 2, the IMF and the deal with the devil. Let's go back to 2020 for a moment. And did you ever ask yourself why all of these countries were in unison when it came to the lockdowns for the cerveza sickness? Isn't that a bit odd that there wasn't just maybe 3 or 4? Sure, you could point to maybe Sweden or Tanzania, but pretty much every other country in lockstep was repeating the exact same narrative with the exact same insane policies when you look at it from a cost-benefit analysis and what they are doing to their very own economies, the poor, the middle class, the small and mid-sized businesses. I know personally I was scratching my own head and wondering, how on earth did that just happen? It's like we had a global dictator that was making the rules for every single country on the entire planet. Well, insert the IMF. Why are they important? Because with all of these emerging markets, we'll call them emerging market country ABC, 1, 2, 3, XYZ, the IMF, are the dollar lender of last resort. So to say that they have leverage is probably the most wild understatement of economic history, of global macro history. They have all of the power. They have all the purse strings if these economies get into trouble with their dollar-denominated cash flow that they need to survive. Okay, well, let's think this through. If you're the IMF, would it not be tempting to try to weaponize the Federal Reserve by doing the exact same thing we were talking about in step number 1? So I'm not saying the IMF directly controls the Fed, but maybe they're just whispering in their ear. Maybe they're trying to create an environment that would entice Jerome Powell to continue to increase interest rates from 1.5% to 2.5% to 3.5% and maybe beyond. Yes, Jerome Powell, you're creating or maybe exacerbating a recession in the United States. But do you want to be remembered as Paul Volcker or as Arthur Burns? You don't think that anyone at the IMF or the Davos types at the global elite have had that conversation with Jerome Powell? We'll never know. But my guess would be the probability is extremely high, like 100%. I wouldn't go that far. So if the Fed increases rates or continues to increase rates, this puts all the economic pressure on these emerging markets. So then what do? They go straight to the IMF and say, please, please, we're begging you for the dollars we need. And the IMF comes in and says, well, okay, we could probably make that happen under certain conditions, of course. You remember what we had you do during the cerveza sickness? You remember what our agenda is? Well, in the future, we may need to go back to those same type of strategies. Maybe we have a climate agenda. Maybe we do lockdowns. Maybe we need you to reduce energy use in your local economy, which would be economic suicide. Let's remember what the global elite's objectives are. Number one, they want the world to use less energy. Number two, they want the world to have less people. And I know that sounds conspiratorial, but they have come out numerous times and said this explicitly, that they want to reduce the birth rate. And third, they want power, control, and wealth. I don't think there's any disputing this. So how would they better achieve these objectives? Well, by having the Fed raise rates, put the pressure on the emerging markets, where based on their projections, the emerging markets will be where most of this energy use is occurring in the future that they want to decrease. And let's not forget that the emerging markets, places like Latin America, is who is having all of the kids, right? Look at the demographics in China, Japan, the United States, Europe. Do the global elite have to worry about the birth rates going down there? Absolutely not. They have to worry about the birth rates increasing or staying at the same levels in places like South America and Africa. So, going back to the IMF, they could have the power over all of these smaller countries to turn the dial on energy use and turn the dial on the birth rate through this leverage that they would have as the dollar lender of last resort. Now, I know a lot of you right about now are saying, okay, George, I get it, but come on, the global elite, they're not going to that extent. I know they've come out with a few videos that say we're going to eat bugs, or we're going to reduce our energy use, or I'll own nothing, but I'll be happy. But that's just all talk. Really? Well, for all those people, I would point them to the recent interview with John Bolton on CNN, where he admitted on national TV that he had started global coups in a lot of these emerging market countries. Editor, cut to the clip.
One doesn't have to be brilliant to attempt a coup.
I disagree with that. As somebody who has helped plan coup d'etat, not here, but other places, it takes a lot of work.
So if these types of people are out there helping to overthrow governments in all of these countries, I don't know, governments like maybe Ukraine, something like that, who knows? But we don't want to go down that rabbit hole, do we? But the bottom line is they're out there doing this. Is it any stretch to think that they themselves at the IMF would try to influence the Fed to do their bidding for them? Is it any stretch to think the IMF would try to weaponize the Fed? I don't think so. And let's not forget, if they're able to implement this game plan, it also reduces the price of assets in these countries. Well, you have to ask yourself, why would the global elite want to reduce asset prices in emerging markets, or let's say asset prices globally. Step number 3. Now, to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, let's look at the situation with the Dutch farmers in the Netherlands. Editor, let's cut to the internet. This is from NASDAQ.com, and it's an article written by Jesse Willems for Bitcoin Magazine. Title, Dutch farmers prepare to fight government overreach by gaining financial freedom with Bitcoin. Now, I don't want to focus so much on Bitcoin, but what I do want to focus on is what's happening with the farmers and also what they see as some of the incentives at play. It's week 4 of the Dutch farmers' uprising in the Netherlands, and there's no sign of resolution as farmers refuse to give up their farms and the government refuses to back down on regulation requiring farmers to reduce their nitrogen beyond the point that they can continue farming. Now go ahead and insert Klaus. Right here, they say the World Economic Forum is gaining control. And I've heard this idea discussed on several podcasts, most notably a recent episode of the Tom Woods Show, where he interviewed a journalist that had experience boots on the ground talking directly to the Dutch farmers that were protesting. And he said many of them share this view, where this is a great centralization happening with their own government willingly handing over power to the EU and the World Economic Forum. So what the politicians, the central planners, and the authoritarians are trying to implement in the Netherlands is something, and I'm not making this up, called the EU Green Deal. And this is headed up by the European Commission, whose president is a gal named Ursula von der Leyen. And if you had to guess, would you say that Ursula is part of the World Economic Forum? Editor, cut to the clip.
I have the great pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, to be with us. And actually, Madam President, you opened our 50th anniversary, and many of the people will still remember what a wonderful occasion it has been.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Ladies and gentlemen.
So Ursula, with the European Commission, comes into the Dutch farmers who are growing, let's say, cattle, corn, and cotton. And they say, oh, you farmers, you dumb rubes, you idiots. Don't you know that what you're doing is filthy? It's destroying the environment. And we need you to adopt the EU Green Deal. But then the farmers say, hey, listen, Ursula, we know a little bit more about farming than you do. And if we implement this EU Green Deal, it's going to put us out of business. So if we go out of business, we're going to have to sell our property. If we can't produce the cows, the corn, and the cotton, that means we go bust. Well, if they go bust, what are they going to have to do with their farmland? They're going to have to sell it. And who would be there waiting to buy it from them? Obviously not in a direct way, but maybe an indirect way. That would be Gates with his bag of money and his good pal Klaus with an even bigger bag of money. So let's think this through. This forces the farmers to sell, meaning asset prices come down. So the Gates and the Klaus types, the global elite, can buy these things at pennies on the dollar. Let's go back to step number 2. Remember the IMF? What are they doing if they are weaponizing the Fed by trying to get them to raise interest rates higher? Taking the dollar higher, which is doing what to asset prices in emerging economies and in other economies around the world, not just farmland. It's taking those asset prices straight down to where they can most likely buy those assets at pennies on the dollar, just like they might be able to buy the Dutch farmland at pennies on the dollar as well. And oh, by the way, editor, go ahead and throw up this chart that I found on the World Economic Forum's website. And we can see that the most profit-producing farmland in the EU is none other than where? The Netherlands. Shocker. I know a lot of you watching this video right now over the past couple of years have kind of scratched your head and say, yeah, I get the whole world economic thing and Klaus thing, but you'll own nothing and you'll be happy? Well, I own my house, I own my car, I own all these assets. Maybe you own farmland, and you're thinking, how is Klaus going to take this from me? But maybe he's not. Maybe what they're going to do is weaponize the Fed to decrease asset prices to a point where you'll have no other choice but to sell him what you currently own at pennies on the dollar. I want to be very clear here. I'm just using Klaus as kind of a proxy for the global elite. And I'm not saying that this is what's happening. I want to be super, super clear on that. I'm simply going through a thought experiment, and I'm saying that all of us that value freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism should be thinking about the incentives involved and trying to figure this stuff out. Because at the end of the day, it's the only way that we'll be able to successfully push back on the central planners and the authoritarians. I want to remind you of a quote from Henry Kissinger himself, who Klaus admitted had the greatest influence over his thinking of anyone he has ever met in his life. Editor, cut to the clip.
Let me go back to the time you said when you came here, it transformed your life. Was there a course, a professor who really made that difference for you?
Yes, there was one course, one seminar of Henry Kissinger, which really opened my eyes. I wasn't accepted to the seminar, but I sat in. I think he let me in because I was German. And it was relatively shortly after the war. There were not too many Germans here. And this created a friendship which has endured until today. And Henry has been several times in Davos. And I think it was mainly participating in his seminars that I developed my interest for geopolitical affairs.
Henry Kissinger, Klaus's mentor, said, if you control the food, you control the people. If you control the energy, you control countries. If you control the money, you control the entire world. Maybe, just maybe, the global elite are trying to control the food, energy, and money through the IMF and weaponizing the Fed. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here. I will see you on the next video.